Thank you for being here. We're going to get started. My name is Givens Parr. I'm class of 2016, and I'm the project manager for the Brown Alumni Career Initiative. This is a new project from Alumni Relations where we're trying to create spaces for people to make new career connections and just life connections and support each other amid uncertainty. So we've been running workshops like this one and networking events. And we have a few more events coming up the next couple of weeks. If you want to learn more about those, if you're not already on the email list, please reach out to me. I'll drop my email in the chat. I will also drop our website in the chat. I'd like to briefly introduce our speaker for this workshop. The theme is self-care and burnout, and we have Ravi Chandra, Dr. Ravi Chandra, class of '89, with us here today to talk about this and share his expertise. Ravi is a psychiatrist, a writer, and a compassion educator based in San Francisco, where he also runs mindfulness and self-compassion workshops through his nonprofit organization, SF Love Dojo. And you can find more information on Ravi's books, his workshops, his films. He's also a documentary filmmaker, and his performances on his website, which I will link in the chat. And we're really grateful to have Ravi here to discuss this topic so we can better understand ourselves and people we care about in work and beyond. So I'm going to pass this to Ravi. Ravi, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Givens, and so good to see all of you. And I hope during the discussion we can all come on to video and engage. So it'd be good to see all of you. But it's good to see. I see one person from class of '89, and the presentation is only about 20-25 minutes. We'll have plenty of time for discussion and interaction and questions, and talking about any particular circumstances you might be dealing with, or your friends or loved ones might be dealing with. Just to say, I'm a 1.8 generation immigrant from India. So I came when I was a baby and grew up in the South, in Alabama and Tennessee and St. Louis, and then the Midwest, mostly in Michigan for about 6 years. And before I went to Brown. And I've been on in the Bay Area for most of the time since I graduated, and just recently rotated off the Brown Club board, where we were planning events for alumni in this area. So I've always loved my connection with Brown and really appreciate it, and love connecting with alumni too. So please feel free to reach out anytime if you have questions after this presentation as well. And Givens will give you my contact information. Okay, so let me go ahead and get started, and I will pull up this, and hopefully all this tech will work. So burnout has been a big topic in the last few years. Just a little bit about me. There's the name of the film that I did during the pandemic, which really was a way for me to process my own grief and trauma during the pandemic, and talking to two Asian American men as well. And then there's my book, Face Buddha, which was written 5 years ago. And I write primarily for Psychology Today and eastwindezine.com, where you'll see long form essays. So there are all my information and social media handles as well. Okay, so self-care and dealing with burnout in a time of cultural stress, growth, and change. And I put self-care in quotes because I think none of us can fully take care of ourselves. We're all dependent on each other, dependent on our environment, dependent on the culture, the political system, and so forth. And all of these things do impact us. And so sometimes I think we're unfortunately tasked with caring for ourselves when really it's systemic changes which are necessary. And I hope to just touch on some of that. And I'm sure all of you have perspectives on this too. And so first of all, what is burnout? There are 3 components defined in healthcare and social work, but they are applicable to other situations as well. So emotional exhaustion, just being completely worn out. The reservoir is empty. depersonalization, which is kind of a split in yourself, containing negative attitudes, where those negative attitudes towards your clients or coworkers predominate, a loss of ideals, really shrinking back from one's profession. Detachment is really the classic feature of depersonalization. You really kind of feel totally dissociated from your work. Reduced efficacy, a sense of personal accomplishment and commitment to your career. And it lands on the individual, but of course, as I mentioned, it's embedded in institutional and cultural problems. So we talk about in Buddhist circles and mindfulness communities, they're kind of the first tool is noticing and labeling it. And so this is to help it. If you can name it, you can tame it. If you can feel it, you can heal it. If you can see it, you can free it. You have to go through it to get to it. So really talking about bringing things into conscious awareness and not just assuming that things are the way they are. And so really talking about connecting, naming, and all of this. The second tool is recognizing zones of tolerance. And some of you, if you have been educators, this may be particularly recognizable. So we all have a comfort and safety zone, and then a growth and challenge zone, and where there's discomfort, resistance, and growing pains. But we can also get a lot of difficult emotions in the growth and challenge zone: sadness, anxiety, frustration, resentment, envy, shame, blame, guilt, etc. I mean, those can all happen as we're growing to meet a challenge or difficult situation, particularly where there's a power imbalance. But then there's a point where we get to overwhelm, which is intense emotions, shutting down, defensiveness, hostility, feeling invalidation or dismissiveness of emotion and identity, or burnout, as we've described. And so it's important to name where you are in these zones of tolerance. And then if you start to feel overwhelmed, to bring it back to comfort and safety before we push out into growth and challenge. So one of the tools I talk about is mindful self-compassion, which helps keep us in the growth zone and expand the growth zone, and also expand the comfort and safety zone as well. All of these are, as I mentioned, dependent on others as well. So this is the other thing that we recognize. This is from relational cultural theory, is that disconnection lies at the root of suffering. Burnout is one form that disconnection manifests. And the opposite of suffering is belonging. So relating to others, feeling connected, feeling safe with others. I think that's all feeling understood and cared for, cared about, being appreciated. All of these are important qualities of belonging. We make each other special with our time and attention. And compassion is so central to that. Compassion, of course, is central to our social being, and our social being is central to our identity. The Dalai Lama says, at the most fundamental level, our nature is compassionate. Cooperation, not conflict, lies at the heart of the basic principles that govern our human existence. Ubuntu proverbs: people become people through other people. I am because you are. So recognizing our connection and common humanity is a part of compassion. And I've written, we are who happens to us and what we make of the happening. And John Bowlby, psychiatrist, said, there's no such thing as a baby. There is a baby and someone. We're enmeshed in a social network from our earliest moments. So our third tool is cultivating compassion, which is central to our social being. So that's being able to, one, notice suffering, then developing concern, an emotional response to the suffering, generating the desire to help, and then finally taking action to relieve suffering. And this could be an external action, or it could even be an internal action, really generating a compassionate place within you to care for this part of yourself that's disconnected or feeling burnt out. So the fourth tool, and now this is mindful self-compassion, is typically taught in either an 8-week long, 3-hour per week workshop, or an experiential workshop of 5 days, or you can do shorter workshops, 3 hour and so forth. So, but I really recommend getting these tools under your belt. There's also a workbook which you can work through. And if you write to me, I can give you my guide towards working through the workbook over the course of 8 weeks. There are online meditations. There's about 30 different tools that self-compassion teaches. But it's really best to learn these experientially. And the basic concept of mindful self-compassion consists of these 3 steps. So at the top, this expanding brain meme, stuck inside with all of our difficult emotion. And then mindfulness, which is noticing and labeling, awareness of present experience with acceptance. That's the definition of mindfulness. Awareness of present experience with acceptance. Being with the emotion versus being the emotion, not jumping into a story, judgment, or criticism based on what we're feeling, but really noticing the suffering. Then the second component is common humanity. And that's just recognizing that others feel this emotion as well, that suffering is a part of life. And then finally, offering oneself self-kindness through an action or through an attitude or an awareness of oneself. So one of the tools of mindful self-compassion is the self-compassion break. And I've just outlined these in the text here. So that's the 3 components from mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. And in this moment of suffering, may I at least be kind to myself. And there are other tools such as soothing touch. So if you want to right now, you could put a hand over your heart or 2 hands over your heart and just feel your supportive touch. You could give yourself a hug. I mean, these are all things which actually have physiological impact on you. And we're all, as I said, we're all social beings, and we all need some touch in our lives. And so welcome and affirming touch. And so we can give that to ourselves as well. So those are a couple of the tools of mindful self-compassion. And then another tool that's come up through mindfulness practices is RAIN, the RAIN of self-compassion. So it's an acronym for R, recognize what is happening. A, accept and allow these conditions. Life is just as it is. There is uncertainty, there is difficulty, there is stress. I, investigate with gentle, curious attention. Oh, where is this coming from? What am I feeling? And finally, nurture with loving presence, which includes affirming yourself and allying with others. And here's this quote, the paradox is that I cannot grow or change unless I accept myself as I am and conditions as they are. That doesn't mean giving everything a pass or a buy, but it's just recognizing things are this way. And so to ground us in acceptance before we work on changing the situation or ourselves as we can. The 6th tool, and this is, I don't know if any of you were in the Bay Area or heard about September 9th, 2020, when we had all the fires going on in Northern California. This is a picture from then with the orange skies all day. But the stop method is tool 6. S, stop what you are doing. T, take 3 breaths. O, observe what you're feeling in your body, thoughts, and emotions. Just note and label. And P, proceed with presence. So that's kind of gathering yourself. But even taking 1 3-breath pause before you continue can give you just enough room to gather yourself and add to your reservoir. And the more you do this, the more you can stop. Now, I have a 45-minute a day meditation practice, but if you can just stop, take 3 breaths, and just come, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, come home to your heart, to your body. Just feel yourself in your seat. These moments of cultivating that attention will help you. And as we know, paying attention is actually correlated with happiness. The more we're distracted, the less happy we are. The more we're focused and paying attention, that's correlated with happiness. And this comes from somatic experiencing, scope. slow down, take 10 steps very slowly or 10 deep breaths, noticing any sensations on the bottom of your feet or in your body. C, connect to the body. Cross your arms and ankles, tuck your hands under your armpits. You can lower your head and breathe. Orient, slowly look around, noticing colors and shapes. So really being aware of your environment and letting your gaze rest on something pleasing. That can be soothing and grounding as well. Pendulating refers to kind of bouncing between or shifting between an area of tension in your body and an area of ease. So as you can move back and forth, you can kind of work with the tension by feeling not just the tension, but also ease. So that softens things up and loosens things up. And finally, E, engage. This is towards that goal of belonging, as I mentioned, engaging socially, connecting with someone who can support you. Tool 8. So this is a big tree of contemplative practices. And don't worry, you don't have to write all this down. I believe Givens is going to provide you the slides. But there are all kinds of things. Now, the roots, communion, connection, awareness, being grounded, and being grounded in our experience, our bodies, our identities, but also I think being close to vulnerability is very grounding as well. So we develop tools to be with vulnerability, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But so all of these contemplative practices can help us ground ourselves in stillness and giving us space, warmth, and spaciousness around our experience. Everything from Qigong to connecting with others in vigils and marches, bearing witness to suffering, walking meditation, and so forth. So a lot of techniques, body, mind, medicine is very important to engage in. Yoga, dance. So I'm sure many of you have experiences with these. So this is, again, to rebuild the reservoir and connect to our deepest humanity. As I mentioned, vulnerability. So I've loved during the pandemic reading from Audre Lorde, and this is one of her quotes. There are so many ways in which I'm vulnerable and cannot help but be vulnerable. I'm not going to be more vulnerable by putting weapons of silence in my enemy's hands. So first of all, recognizing that, of course, anybody who's been marginalized or by the dominant culture in particular is going to feel especially vulnerable, but we all have vulnerability as human beings as well. But I think part of our task, particularly at this time of our collective history, is acknowledging and accepting vulnerability in ourselves and others, breaking silence, building community and belonging, and recognizing the ways in which systems that we're embedded in create more vulnerability, and how we must create systems that support our vulnerability as humans and allow us to feel safe and journey towards wellness. Burnout is less about the individual than about the situation and environment. So there are institutional remedies that include changes in work culture, in organizational culture, workload, group support, and allyship, supporting self-care, because that's part of it as well, supporting individual and group education, and improving work environment, which takes a lot of listening to people who are on the ground, on the front lines. And I think cultural changes include moving from individualistic, narcissistic, antagonistic, power, achievement, domination, authoritarian myths to a more interdependent, collaborative, and collective realities that support justice, equity, and belonging, where we're really all seeing each other. And I like to talk about these 5 things: mindfulness, compassion, relationship, creativity, and insight. That's all pretty broad, but it's just recognizing that we're all in a process of continual growth and change. And so we could include all aspects of the culture, music, media, literature, and love as stimulating us towards growth and towards belonging, feeding the undernourished parts of ourselves, that need connection, rehumanization, and belonging. Here are all of the takeaways. So we've gone through all of these tools, and you can see them here on this slide. And we are all on shared journeys of identity, belonging, wellness, and meaning. And we have these 4 buckets, I think, that we're all working on. Certainly work, love and relationships, play, and wellness. And I think feeding all of that is so important to our humanity. And our fundamental human task, I think, and of course I'm biased as a psychiatrist, is learning how to help each other on these journeys of identity, belonging, wellness, and meaning. So how to earn our human cards when we've been dehumanized and burnt out by the systems that we're in, or by whatever personal factors we're carrying, to face our vulnerability, break silence, add compassion, ask for help, and provide help. We are not human doings. We are human beings and human relatings. So thank you. That's my presentation. As I said, about 20 minutes. And yeah, I'm happy to answer questions and open it up to discussion. And I'd love to hear about you and your journeys and where you're at and so forth. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Ravi.
Sure.
I would just welcome everyone to jump in as you wish. As Ravi said, you can type your question in the chat or just ask it out. I was wondering if you could share, if appropriate, some anecdotal portraits maybe of transformation, how maybe people you've worked with, people you've known, have dealt with burnout and perhaps even changed their work culture, and how. Anything come to mind that you can?
Yeah, well, several things come to mind. First of all, I think I've known many people, either patients or friends and peers, who've actually had to take time off from work. They've just gotten so overwhelmed and overloaded and burnt out. It's really been helpful, whether they've gone on some kind of journey of self-transformation, getting care, of course, but even changing career paths. So sometimes that's very important. And I think I've seen a lot of people, especially during the last 3 to 8 years, recognize how systems of power have impacted their growth and so forth. And so they've transitioned, working, connecting with this dismantling oppression and working on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. So I think these are become more a part of our dialogue because of people like that. I've had to take time off as well when just feeling overwhelmed. And for example, after George Floyd was murdered, I took almost a month off just to kind of gather myself, connect with others, and do some writing, etc. And so these are all, I think we just need to have time off. And so I think we all need to support each other. We're all human. As you know, we had examples of Olympic class athletes over the last few years stepping back from the playing field to take care of their mental health. Naomi Osaka, Simone Biles, I think there are a lot of examples of even people who are at the very peak performance levels. We're all just human. Recognizing when our cup is full, when we're approaching the overwhelm, or when we are overwhelmed. And I think fall down 9 times to get up 10. We all continuously learn and find what feeds us and what feeds our lives. And that's very important. Just recognizing that we're all just human.
So we have a question from Carrie. Yeah, thank you for that answer. Carrie asked, what if you don't have the option of taking time off or taking time for some of these other activities?
Wow, that sounds like a very difficult situation. I would say, some of these things that I talk about can just take, like the stop method or a little bit of mindful self-compassion, can just take a moment out of your day. So to do what you can, but and then seeing where that takes you. Again, I think a lot of this is not about solving, quote, the problem, but really listening to yourself and being able to respond and adjust to yourself. So even just a minute or 2 of breathing or meditation can be helpful. And then it's up to you and your loved ones and whoever you can include in your circle of support to figure out, well, what's the best use of your time for the short term and the long term? And do I need to adjust my time? For example, another kind of minor example is that I stepped back from working basically full time. I was splitting my time between a clinic and my private practice for many years, and then found I wanted more time for lunches with friends and time to write. And so I left my clinic job, and now I work about 3.5 days in my private practice to have enough time to really devote my time to my patients, but also have space for meeting with friends and writing and so forth. All these things that connect to other people and the broader culture. So I think, and that happened many years into my career as well. So, I mean, there's always time to make adjustment and find ways to feed yourself. Yeah, I hope that answers it. If you had any specific comment, please let me know.
Ravi, for
Mhm.
folks, and a related question for folks who don't have a lot of control over their work schedule and perhaps answer directly to a manager or something like that, do you have recommendations for how to approach the people who have some kind of institutional power over you and address workplace culture issues related to burnout? And conversely, for people who have the privilege of managing other people directly and have some institutional power, do you have advice for how to create these spaces to listen and open the workplace culture for change?
Yeah, well, I guess every situation is different, so I don't want to generalize too much. But of course, finding allies and people who can listen. It's great if your manager can do that, and if you are a manager, to be able to listen to other people and recognize their situations. Many workplaces do have some kind of a wellness program these days, at least in the Bay Area. That's true. That's important, and very often, especially during the pandemic, I think a lot of tech companies, for example, had wellness programs that they kind of extended to the work from home space as well. And so I mean, there are these possibilities, but it really recognizing your specific circumstances of suffering and difficulty and even burnout, and think finding language for this. But obviously, this is one of the big topics of the last few years, especially working moms. I think have had particular difficulty with juggling these different roles and not getting as much support as they should. So I think there's a lot of conversation that's bubbling up. And I hope it creates lasting change for everyone. Are people in managerial roles, or are you, how has burnout affected all of you? Oh, I see someone wrote that they took the 8-week MSc course and found it helpful. But then some helpful things like common humanity, slipping out of negative self-talk and criticism, blame. Yeah, that's right. Changing the inner voice. I just read a great book called Chatter by Ethan Kross. So I recommend that as a quick read to just look at the inner voice and work with it. I'm actually later this week, I'm publishing an article on Psychology Today about dealing with catastrophic fears and anxieties. So if I'll send that to Givens, and she has your email, she could distribute it to you, I guess, if that's appropriate. But you can look on Psychology Today or check my Twitter. That'll be up later this week. We do need to pay attention to our inner voices, noticing, labeling, working with, understanding the processes of our minds as well as they are, again, embedded in the culture.
In my former position, I was head of human resources for a biotech company. Very fast-paced environment, very hectic, very pressure-packed, with 4 different sites that I was responsible for. And I found myself in a place after many years, almost hitting the burnout stage, because I was really doing so much for everybody else, but really not for me. And I started to think about self-care. And for the person that asked the question about when you don't have time, and I never felt like I had time. And I was looking at I think it was the Calm app that you can, have on your telephone, or that app. And it had it said 1 minute SOS. And I thought, that's not, one day I was like really very stressed about something. And I went and it was the first time I ever did this. Somebody wanted to talk to me, and I said, I really need a minute. and I closed my door. I was able to have an office. I closed my door and I put on this 1 minute app on my telephone, and it was breathing and listening. And I thought it'll never help me, but it did. And I couldn't believe it. And after that, I started learning more about meditation and practicing and more guided meditations. But in my job, I also tried to open up a wellness initiative for employees. And I brought yoga lessons in once a week, and people could or couldn't do it at lunchtime. And we had walking competitions and baking competitions. We did all sorts of things that took people out of the lab and, really got them to have some fun and connect with other people. So that was 4 small companies that comprised one big one. But, I think there are ways if you're a manager that you can do that with your staff. But just for yourself, I really believe if you stop and take the 3 breaths, or any of the tools that you showed or you can find online, they actually really do help. And I was a doubter, and I'm a very anxious person, internally anxious person. People don't necessarily know I am, but I am. And I found these things to be very soothing and calming and just slowed me down. And that's exactly what I needed. So I really appreciate I really enjoyed your talk, but I totally agree with it from my own experience anyway.
That's wonderful. So out of a need came a 1-minute intervention that led to a whole variety of programs. And if you're feeling something, other people are feeling it too, so that's one important. The common humanity aspect of this is so important. We've all been through something, this last few years especially. So yeah, so thank you, Paula. Anything else coming through in chat? Yeah, just many challenges or pulls on your attention, how to address each. And yeah, I guess, you have to, in general, I think we all have to, as the saying goes, put the oxygen mask on ourselves before we can help the people in the seats next to us. So how to do that? I mean, that requires some ongoing creativity and engagement, and even recognizing. I don't know. It's like I don't know what your cultural backgrounds are, but sometimes we're taught it's all about the other people in our lives or about work, and oh no, we are. That's very dehumanizing, right? Well, we are important. Our needs are important, and if we're embedded in systems that tell us that our thoughts, emotions, identities, etc., are not important, then that requires some change as well. So valuing ourselves is an important step in connecting to, again, our common humanity and what we all need. Safety and wellness are all interdependent.
Thank you all for your comments and your questions, and thank you, Ravi, for those responses. I'm wondering, Ravi, if you could share how you came to this work, self-compassion in particular.
Oh, out of need, absolute need. So I've been practicing mindfulness for many years, since about 1997. And I found it really helpful. And I added some other components of Buddhist practice, like loving kindness, meditation, and so forth. I know these are all really helpful in transforming my inner life and helping me through the path of residency and so forth. And of course, I didn't have as much time during residency to meditate, but did afterward. And then actually. The election of Donald Trump, unfortunately, was another great challenge. I found more need to support my emotional life, and so looked for compassion classes, found the Mindful Self-Compassion program, took an intensive, also a compassion cultivation training through Stanford, what was associated with Stanford, the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. So took those and became teachers in both of those modalities as well. And so just, applying compassion to one's experience. I mean, that helped me kind of at least diffuse at times some of the toxicity that was coming in from the culture. and be more centered and not be so activated. But that, of course, that fluctuates. So the processes are continuous. So it came out of need, really. And I found these skills just so helpful, particularly the mindful self-compassion. I call it the umami of the inner life. So umami is the fifth flavor, sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and umami. Umami is a kind of a tangy taste. That's glutamate. That makes food tasty and delicious. So I call friendliness and compassion the umami of the inner life and relatedness. They make our inner lives and relatedness more tasty and delicious. So I'm just trying to add plenty of umami to whatever emotions are coming up in one's life, whether from despair to exhaustion to grief and so forth, to add friendliness and compassion. I think really shifts things. We all need that. I think we particularly needed that during the pandemic when we've been relatively isolated, many of us, for more than we have before. So we need to kind of nurture that quality again.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, thank you for doing this work and for sharing it with us. I'm
Absolutely
related to the pandemic comment. Do you see major differences between the burnout people experience when they're in person and in their workplace and burnout when people are working primarily virtually? Do you have any insights?
Well, of course. I mean, the first thought I have is just the isolation that comes up. I mean, there's such, it's like being on Zoom versus, passing a colleague in the hallway or having a cup of coffee together. So I mean, it's just like relaxing. Those moments of relaxation, interaction don't happen. So it's much tougher to be on your own. Everybody has different living circumstances as well. And so that adds another layer of stress potentially. So the isolation has been a big factor. And I know, some companies have been starting to go back to some in person. So I think that'll hopefully shift back. And I think, especially for younger people, for adolescents, I think the isolation has taken a big toll because so much, especially of our early developmental lives, are about relationships. But I think most people can bounce back into it when given the right opportunity. But we just have to recognize how important that is, I think. But the isolation has been a big factor. And also, I mean, apparently we've all been overall more productive at work from home. So there's nothing else to do. I don't know. But I mean, that's life isn't all about productivity. And as again, we're human beings, not human doings. And so I think we have to finding ways to put boundaries on email and messages and all this. That's so important. I don't know. I know some countries, Germany, the unions have laws that, the work email shuts down at 5 p.m. And I think that would be great. In this country, oh my God, wouldn't that make such a difference in all of our lives? I mean, people getting bombarded and feeling like they have to respond at all hours of the day. I mean, that's not sustainable for long periods of time.
I have a quick question. Can I ask?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It just occurred to me while you were talking. I do a lot of self-care and things. I have all these tools and tricks and everything, but I think, here's my thought. Do you have like any kind of go-to when you're in a situation with a person who's done zero work and has no interest in any of this stuff and they're kind of spilling out? I know we're talking about like self-compassion, but do you have like kind of a way that you would work with bringing that space to another person who's not really present or be there?
Sure. Well, I think we need the emotional validation and support, the cognitive reframing or different perspective, and we need the relational as well. So I think, first of all, the emotional validation that the person is heard in their distress, to help them label it, to be the mindful partner to someone, and then perhaps offering a perspective to contain. I think sometimes we might need to be contained a little bit, but I think the emotional validation really goes a long way. But I think over time you get to learn about the other person. Do they need to vent? Are they typically venting? Does venting what effect does that have on them? And typically I think people need more than just to vent, because that usually just recirculates the same issues often. But we all do need to be heard. So it's all a very delicate balance. But I think, and just recognizing their effects on you as well. And again, putting that oxygen mask on yourself as well. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does. It's funny
Yeah.
because this hasn't happened to me in a while, but I've always been
Mm.
like, I'm going to be the person who's, not going to react. And that sometimes makes people more upset because they're not getting the, but I just was listening to the way that you would laid everything out, which is so nice. And I thought, oh, I wonder how I could apply this out in the world, and I think I do in little ways, but this is all interesting. I'll look at it and kind of.
Yeah, I think we all need to be understood. I think, and so that emotional validation is so important. So you can always, find a way to encourage people to navigate their own inner lives, actions. But being a mindful partner to someone in distress is so important. In fact, I just had an article published in Lion's Roar called "Someone I Love is Hurting." I can put that in the chat.
It's wonderful to see you all here. Thank you for joining us. And thank you so much, Ravi, for your insights.
You're welcome. Thanks to all of you. And hopefully I'll see you at a reunion or something in the future.
Yes, hope
All
to
right.
see you all in person at some point soon. Take good care.
Take care. Bye-bye.